Tonight we slip into the narrow, twisting lanes of a medieval town where the air is a cocktail of wood smoke, manure, and something vaguely rotting that you can't quite identify in. Maybe you don't want to. The street is uneven under your boots, damp from yesterday's rain, and every step threatens to send you ankle-deep into a puddle of questionable origin. You push through clusters of people hawking fish that should have been sold yesterday, past chickens darting between legs, until you reach your practice. It's not exactly a grand stone building with marble floors, more like a leaning wooden room that smells faintly of boiled cabbage and other things you try not to dwell on. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Being a medieval doctor means you're not just working with sick people, you're marinating in an environment that's basically an all-you-can-eat buffet for bacteria. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your candle sputters as you step inside. The only light in the dim alley fading behind you. The wooden walls sweat with damp, and the ceiling hangs low enough that you can feel its chill pressing down. Somewhere behind the building, a neighbor empties a chamber pot into the gutter, and the aroma wafts through the cracks like an uninvited guest. You shrugged. If it bothered you, you wouldn't still be here. Outside, the town churns. There's the sound of a cart rumbling over cobblestones, the clang of the blacksmith hammering at horseshoes, and somewhere, a baby crying. Inside your head, though you're already cataloging the day's likely cases, coughing that won't stop, mysterious fevers, festering wounds from minor accidents, and maybe if the stars align, a wealthy merchant with a bad back willing to pay in silver. Historians still argue whether the average medieval street was truly more dangerous to your health than the actual patients you saw. But you're fairly certain they're missing the point. In here and out there, it's all dangerous. You pull off your damp cloak and hang it by the door, careful not to let it brush against your supplies bundles of dried herbs hanging from the beams, jars of murky liquids with suspicious sediments at the bottom, and one precious set of surgical knives. You know, the ones you cleaned last week with a cloth you think might have been cleanish? The rat you've been sharing the space with darts across the floor and disappears under a stool. You sigh. You've named him Gerard. You tell yourself he's good company. Through the warped shutters, a faint glow of sunrise seeps in, though it does little to brighten the room. It's enough, though, to reveal the first patient waiting outside, an old woman clutching a basket and coughing into a rag. She waves you over with a hand knotted by arthritis. You'll see her soon enough, but first, you rummage through your satchel for the dried rosemary and vinegar you were steeping overnight. You'd read somewhere well heard from a traveling herbalist that this concoction could purify the air. Whether it actually worked or not was irrelevant. It made you feel like you were doing something useful. You step back into the street for a moment to take in the scene. The town's smells mingle into a dizzying bouquet. Warm bread from the baker's oven, the tang of fresh-cut leather, and the unmistakable sourness of waste running in the gutters. Somewhere, someone is roasting chestnuts, and you almost forget the stench until a sudden gust of wind pushes it all back into your nostrils. Your gaze falls on a boy chasing a dog. barefoot despite the frost. His laughter cuts through the murmur of merchants shouting about their wares. For a fleeting second, you envy him. No patience to heal, no midnight knocks on the door, no wondering whether the strange rash on your arm came from a patient or from something lurking in your own bed. You adjust your satchel and remind yourself that this is the life you chose, or rather, the life you ended up in, because your father knew someone who knew a physician who owed him a favor. The old woman outside coughs again, louder this time. You glance down the street at the baker, who's sweeping the front of his shop, sending a small cloud of flour into the air. It glitters in the sunlight, and for a moment the alley looks almost beautiful. Then someone empties another chamber pot, and reality returns. You step back inside, ready to face your first patient of the day, your mind already running through possibilities. Excess phlegm, imbalance of humors, or perhaps just the kind of winter cough that no amount of rosemary vinegar will cure. You light another candle and pull your stool closer to the window, because, at least with more light, you can pretend to see what you're doing. Gerard rustles somewhere in the shadows, and you murmur to him, "Another day in paradise." You take a deep breath, the rosemary and vinegar almost masking the sickly sweet stench that seeped into your clothes, your hair, and probably your soul. You remember your first day as an apprentice. Though day is generous, it was more like a long initiation ritual of humiliation and backache. You were 14, skinny as a broom handle, and terrified of spilling anything in front of Master Willem. He was the sort of man whose eyebrows seemed to have taken a vow of eternal scowl, and whose voice could strip the confidence right off you. Your duties at first had little to do with medicine. You fetched water from the town well, a half walk each way, and then carried it back in sloshing buckets that left your shoulders aching. You swept floors until the dirt seemed to multiply in protest. You restocked shelves with herbs you couldn't yet name, like betony and celandine, which you secretly suspected were just weeds he'd pulled from the side of the road. And then there were the leeches. Oh, the leeches. Your job wasn't just to keep them alive, though that was bad enough. It was to keep them fresh, which meant you were sometimes ordered to give them a little snack on yourself. A doctor must be willing to bleed for his craft, Willem would say, plopping one on your forearm. Historians still argue whether these test feedings were actually common practice or just the whims of particularly cruel masters. But in your experience, there's no scholarly debate, Willem. Just enjoyed watching you squirm. You learned quickly that most of your training wouldn't come from reading. Books were rare, expensive, and usually written in Latin, which you only half understood. So instead, you watched Willem poke at swollen joints, sniff at phials of urine, and tap a patient's chest while muttering about phlegm and bile. You fetched what he needed before he asked: hot water, linen bandages, a wooden spoon to bite during pain. Sometimes you were wrong, and you'd earn a sharp "use your head, boy." And then there were the errands. You were sent to the apothecary across town to pick up powdered foxglove or ground oyster shells, dodging carts and sidestepping puddles that were definitely not just water. Or you'd be dispatched to a patient's home with instructions to observe the symptoms and report back. This was usually code for sit in the corner, try not to breathe too loudly, and pretend you understand what's happening. Every once in a while, Willem would give you the honor of stirring a medicinal paste. You'd stand over a mortar and pestle, grinding dried herbs into dust, while the smell rose into your nose, sometimes pleasant, like mint, but more often a pungent, eye-watering assault. One particularly infamous recipe involved crushed garlic vinegar. And though Willem never admitted it something that looked suspiciously like pigeon droppings, he called it a drawing salve. You called it the smell that haunts my dreams. When you weren't at the practice, you were often helping Willem on house calls. That meant carrying his heavy satchel of tools, which included knives, saws, forceps, and a mysterious hooked instrument you weren't brave enough to ask about. People stared at you in the street, sizing you up. Some nodded respectfully. Others crossed themselves as you passed. You tried to ignore the whispers. That's the doctor's boy, probably already cursed. But there were moments, rare as they were, that felt almost magical. The first time you watched Willem set a broken arm, and the patient after much wailing looked up with genuine relief. You thought, maybe this isn't so bad. Or the evening when you mixed a simple infusion of chamomile and honey for a child's cough, and the mother thanked you as if you'd saved a life. Still, the bulk of your apprenticeship was drudgery. You learned how to scrub stubborn stains out of linen bandages, hint, cold water, not hot. How to identify the difference between healthy and dangerous smells in a wound, and how to recognize when a patient was more likely to die from your treatment than from the disease. You didn't say that last part out loud, of course. You also learned about politics, not the royal kind, but the delicate dance of keeping townsfolk happy. Treat the baker's wife kindly, and you might get extra bread in winter. Make the brewer's cousin wait too long for a visit, and you'd find your ale tasting suspiciously watered down. Willem drilled it into you. We're not just healers, we're traders in goodwill. And if you thought the days were long, the nights could be worse. Willem had no qualms about waking you from a deep sleep because someone on the far side of town had developed a troubling complexion that usually meant trudging through dark alleys, clutching a candle lantern, hoping the shapes you saw moving in the shadows were just cats. Occasionally they weren't. After years of being more servant than student, you finally graduated to handling minor cases on your own. A headache here, a sprained wrist there. The first time Willem left you alone in the shop, you sat behind the table, trying to look authoritative, though your knees trembled every time the door creaked open. Looking back, you realize you learned more than just medicine. You learned patience, resilience, and how to carry a conversation while pretending not to notice the enormous boil on someone's neck. You learned that the town's gossip network is faster than any messenger, and that if you sneeze while holding a jar of leeches, you will regret it for the rest of the week. And perhaps most importantly, you learned that in this line of work, a thick skin is worth more than a full purse. Your practice, if you could even call it, that was never meant to impress. It wasn't in a fine building of stone, or even a cozy timber-framed home. No, your domain was a sagging lean-to tucked behind a tannery, where the smell of boiled hides clung to the walls like a curse. If the wind blew just right, it brought the scent of the nearby butcher's yard. If it blew the other way, you'd get the latrine runoff from the alley. Neither was a treat. Inside, it was just enough space for you, your supplies, and possibly one patient too, if neither of you needed to sit down or breathe too deeply. The walls were timber slats with gaps wide enough for light and wind to sneak in, but not wide enough to discourage the occasional spider. You often joked to yourself that the place was cozier than it looked, but you never laughed out loud. Laughing stirred the dust, and the dust stirred the rats. Your work table, rough-hewn and perpetually uneven, was covered in linen cloths, stains in every shade from rust red to bill yellow. You told yourself that gave it character. A stack of clean rags rested in the corner, although clean just meant you'd washed them in river water instead of reusing the ones from last week. Historians still argue whether sanitation was truly misunderstood or merely impossible. But from your corner of the world, clean was a matter of relativity. Then there were your tools, proudly displayed on a small wooden shelf: tweezers, shears, curved blades, forceps, and a clamp whose exact purpose you were still figuring out. They gleamed well, not so much gleamed as looked slightly less filthy after a rinse in cider vinegar. You wiped them down between patients if time allowed, which it usually didn't. But you reassured yourself with the old saying, if it smells like iron and hasn't been dropped in the dung heap, it's probably safe. At your feet, a bucket caught drips from the ceiling. Rain or rat urine nude, given up trying to tell. Nearby, a small brazier served as both heater and herbal vaporizer. You often tossed rosemary or thyme into it just to mask the omnipresent scent of damp socks and human worry. But perhaps the centerpiece of your medical empire was the chair. One single, three-legged stool, slightly cracked, perpetually wobbly, and universally feared. Your patients perched on it, as if balancing on a fence post. More than once, you'd watched a grown man nearly topple trying to explain his symptoms, while shifting his weight to avoid the splintering edge. You kept meaning to replace it, but it had become something of a legend. If it didn't collapse under you, people said it was a sign your illness would pass. The patients came in at all hours. They ducked through the curtain over the doorway, eyes darting, hands clutching their hats or their stomachs or whatever part of them felt cursed today. Some came with quiet apologies and trembling voices. Others barreled in, dragging children or elderly parents like livestock. You always had to look calm, even if someone was bleeding, crying, or on one unfortunate occasion, foaming slightly at the mouth. You rarely asked for money up front. Most folks offered chickens, loaves of bread, or the promise of future favors. Once, a woman paid you with a live eel, which escaped under your work table and wasn't seen again for days. Another time, a man gave you a piglet who promptly urinated on your foot and then tried to eat your ledger. Speaking of your ledger, was a masterpiece of illegibility, scrawled in a mix of Latin and hurried chicken scratch. It tracked patients, symptoms, treatments, and mysterious outcomes like recovered, deteriorated, or vanished. You tried to be scientific, but there were days when you simply wrote, went home looking pale, may or may not still be breathing. Of course, you had your regulars. Old Hilda with the bad knees came every week, more for the company than the salve. Tomas the baker visited every time his back gave out from lifting flour sacks, swearing loudly as you rubbed mustard paste into his spine. And little Annika, who didn't seem to be ill but liked to listen to your stories while her mother gossiped with the tanner's wife outside. There was comfort in the routine. even when it was broken by the occasional screaming patient or unexpected bodily fluid. You got used to the rhythm: morning prep, midday treatments, evening cleanup, and the inevitable surprise knock at bedtime. And through it all, the Liantu creaked and shifted, but somehow held together. You joked that the rats held the place up by mutual agreement. One day, you tried rearranging the space, moved the table to the far wall, hung herbs above the entrance instead of the brazier. You even considered cleaning the floor properly, but the changes made it feel strange, unfamiliar. So you put everything back the next day and vowed never to be so ambitious again. Every now and then, a fancy visitor from another town would pass through and peek inside. They'd wrinkle their nose, mutter something about unsanitary conditions, and offer unsolicited advice about ventilation and hygiene. You'd smile, nod, and pretend you hadn't just used your own sleeve to wipe someone's forehead. Because, here's the thing, it was unsanitary, but it was also all anyone had. Even so, you dreamed sometimes of a proper building: stone walls, glass windows, a second chair, maybe. One where the patient could sit without praying first. But those were distant dreams, the sort that slipped away with the morning frost. For now, you had Gerard, the flickering candlelight, and the comforting sound of boiling herbs, plus, of course, a solid pile of dirty rags, and the knowledge that tomorrow's ailments were already on their way. Your next patient is already in the doorway before you've finished washing your hands in a bowl of tepid water that looks and smells like it's been used one too many times. You wipe your fingers on a cloth stiff with previous wipe-downs and motion for them to sit. It's a middle-aged man with sunken eyes and the posture of someone who's given up on the concept of comfort. He drops a small leather pouch on the table and says, "Take a look, if you would." You open the pouch, expecting coins, or maybe another eel, but instead you find a stoppered glass vial filled with urine. Time to shine. In your world, diagnosis begins not with scans or blood work, but with color, consistency, and scent. The urine wheel, a parchment chart pinned behind your shelf, helps guide you. Reddish and sweet suggests heat in the liver. Cloudy and sour might mean corrupted humors. And if it's green, well, no one really agrees on that one. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors truly believed green urine was a sign of death or just very bad digestion. But either way, it's never a good conversation starter. You carefully uncork the vial and give it a cautious sniff, like a sommelier evaluating a particularly adventurous wine. It's sharp, slightly sour, and has a troubling metallic tang. "Too much black bile," you declare, nodding sagely. He looks impressed. You're not entirely sure what it means either, but it sounds convincing. Next comes pulse reading, not like the gentle, measured way modern doctors do it. Oh no, you grab the wrist firmly and feel for signs of imbalance. A fast pulse, too much heat, a sluggish one, cold phlegm is clogging things up. That's the theory, anyway. The reality is that most pulses feel the same, and you rely heavily on intuition, facial color, and whether the patient just looks wrong. You ask him what he's been eating lately. "Mostly barley porridge, with turnips," he says. "Of course it is." You nod, scribble something in your ledger, and announce that his humors are disturbed. That's always a safe bet. The 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow, bile, and black. Bile govern everything. Every cough, every ache, every fainting spell is a matter of too much or too little of one. The problem is, no one has ever seen a humor. You certainly haven't, but you talk about them with the conviction of someone who's been backed into a corner and handed a theory with no way out. Your liver is dry and overwarm, you say. That sounds plausible. He nods solemnly. You recommend a cooling broth made from lettuce, vinegar, and a bit of powdered pearl, if he can find some. He says he'll check with his cousin. You both know he'll just drink water and hope for the best. You've seen stranger symptoms. A woman once came in claiming her skin itched whenever the moon was full. Another was convinced her baby had been swapped by forest spirits and wanted you to check his bones. You obliged, gently, mostly by holding the child up to the light and frowning thoughtfully. Sometimes people don't need medicine, they need performance. One of the weirder diagnostic tricks you learned from Master Willem was inspecting a person's face for imbalance. Pale cheeks, cold flushed cheeks, heat, yellow eyes, liver, bile, swollen lips, possibly demonic possession, though that one's fallen out of fashion lately. You once had a whole week where you blamed every case on melancholic excess. It worked until someone brought you a chicken with the same symptoms. Then there's the dream interpretation. People occasionally tell you their dreams, hoping for a diagnosis. I dreamt of drowning in honey, one man said. Your spleen is likely overheated, you replied, without missing a beat. You have no idea what the spleen actually does, but people like hearing that it's involved. Despite the uncertainty, you've developed a rhythm. You ask questions, nod thoughtfully, and deliver a confident verdict. It helps that most patients want something simple, a name for their pain, a plan of action, and the assurance that they're not going to die in their sleep. You can usually provide 2 out of 3. Some diagnoses are easy. A rash from spoiled food. Apply mashed basil and avoid root vegetables for a week. A persistent cough. Figs boiled in wine. Headaches. Cold compresses. Gentle music. And absolutely no thinking about taxes. Others are harder. Mysterious fevers, sudden seizures, or chronic fatigue often leave you stalling for time, offering tonics while you wait to see what happens next. But there's one thing you always avoid, admitting you don't know. That's not an option. If you hesitate, if you show doubt, the patient's faith falters. And once faith falters, your livelihood follows. Better to say, ah yes, your collar is clearly dominant this season, and prescribe something herbal. Even if the treatment doesn't work, the ritual often does. People feel better when they do something. When they take a tonic, sit for a poultice, or follow a list of healing foods, they feel in control, and sometimes that's enough. Placebo is a concept you don't yet know by name, but you wield it like a master as the man leaves, promising to eat fewer turnips and maybe chew some mint leaves. You sit back and take a moment to rest. The candles burned halfway down, and Gerard the rat is snoring softly beneath the stool. You pick up the vial of urine again, just to double-check. Still yellowish, still foul, still one of 1,000 fluids you'll inspect in your career. You place it carefully in the waste bucket and wash your hands again. Not because it helps, but because it makes you feel better. Another knock at the door, another pouch in hand, another jar of something questionable waiting to be sniffed. You Breathe deeply, center yourself, and prepare your best wise doctor face. Here comes the next mystery. You barely have time to sit before the next patient stumbles in, a young man, clutching his side and muttering that his humors are misbehaving again. You recognize him. He's the one who insists his stomach is ruled by Saturn, and that his digestion depends on the moon's attitude. You nod solemnly, as you always do, and gesture for him to take a seat on the infamous stool. You ask the usual questions, feel his forehead, and tap his ribs a few times with the back of your hand, mostly for show. He insists he has an imbalance of black bile. You glance at the urine wheel just for effect, shake your head a little, and declare your spleen is sulking again. He sighs, as if this is exactly what he feared, and so you begin. Time for the humors. They govern everything. The theory is simple, or at least it sounds that way when you say it with confidence. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, they must be in balance, or chaos reigns. Not just physical illness, but mental upset, even social discord. Feeling anxious, too much yellow bile, lazy, that's excessive phlegm. Had a dream about dancing. Turnips, probably the fault of blood vapors rising during sleep. The humors aren't just inside your body, they're in your food, your environment, even your personality. Melancholic people are ruled by black bile, serious, introspective, and prone to staring into puddles. Sanguine types have abundant blood, full of cheer and impulsive ideas. Like starting a theater troupe with zero talent, you hand the young man a concoction made from fennel, wine, and something that might have once been licorice root. It's meant to warm the spleen and calm the digestion. Does it work? Who knows? He always says he feels better afterward, and you pretend that's due to your skill and not the wine. You remember when Master Willem first drilled the humors into your head. He had you sort everything in the practice according to them, herbs into warm or cold, dry or wet, foods by whether they produced bile or calmed it. You spent hours debating whether onions were more hot than moist. At one point, you were told to chew raw parsley and note the effect on your dreams. You don't remember the dreams, but you developed an aversion to parsley that never went away. The humors don't just dictate treatments, they shape your very identity as a doctor. You speak of them with reverence, as if they are visible truths. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians truly believed in the four humors as literal substances or used them as a conceptual tool to explain illness. But for you, it doesn't matter. They are your compass in a world without microscopes or germ theory. There's comfort in the simplicity. Someone's sick, find the excess, counter it. Too hot, cool them. Too wet, dry them. Bloodletting, purging, sweating, all of these are just methods to nudge the humors back into line. If they're in balance, the body sings. If not, it groans. Not all patients appreciate the theory, of course. Some just want the pain to stop. Others insist on their own diagnosis. It's my bile again, or I'm phlegmatic today. You once had a man storm in and demand to be bled immediately because he'd argued with his wife and was sure his temper was due to overheated blood. You obliged. He left calmer, though you suspect that was due to lightheadedness more than emotional resolution. Then there are the special cases. The people who ask, what if my humors are supposed to be unbalanced. One woman claimed her dreams improved when her bile levels were unusually creative. Another swore she had prophetic visions every time she was feverish. You tread lightly with those. If you say the wrong thing, you might lose a patient or gain a follower who won't stop showing up with more jars of fluids. You once treated a blacksmith who insisted his daughter was possessed by cold phlegm. She had a runny nose and a tendency to nap after lunch. You prescribed ginger tea, which pleased him. He later brought you a half-finished horseshoe as thanks, which you now use as a paperweight. Not that you have much paper, but it's a good conversation starter. As you tidy up your shelf, you realize something. The four humors might not be real, but they've given you a way to survive this profession. When everything is mysterious, terrifying, and potentially fatal, it helps to have a framework, something to point to, a chart on the wall, a phrase to repeat, an excess of color. You murmur, and it feels like an answer, even when it eyes in single quotes to outside. The church bell tolls for midday. Your stomach reminds you that your humors are unbalanced. Specifically, your blood sugar is tragically low. You rummage in your satchel for a crust of bread and a withered apple, chewing while you flip through your patient ledger. It's filled with little notes: phlegmatic, avoid cheese, melancholic, prefers soft lighting, rants about astrology, gently redirect. You jot down today's observations: young man, spleen, melancholy, administered warm tonic, appears soothed. You pause, then add, revisit in 3 days. Warn him about eating beets during waning moon. You have no idea whether beets do anything at all, but it sounds mysterious enough to earn his trust. And maybe, in a way, that's your true job: not to cure, but to reassure, to make sense of what seems senseless, to offer a name for the fear, a plan for the chaos, a warm brew and a gentle voice in a world full of unpredictable pain. And as long as people keep walking through your curtain, holding jars and clutching their stomachs, the humors, confusing as they are, will keep you grounded. You'll never forget the first time you had to bleed someone. It was a merchant, middle-aged, wealthy, with the kind of red cheeks and loud voice that always screamed too much blood. He came in complaining of a headache and a general sense of agitation. Of course, Master Willem took one look at him and declared, "The man's positively overflowing. We must relieve him." You tried not to show your hesitation as you fetched the Flema brass tool, shaped like a tiny axe with a spring-loaded blade. It looked more like something you'd use to tenderize meat than perform medicine. Willem didn't blink. He tied the man's arm with a leather strap, pressed the phlegm against a plump blue vein, and snapped. The blade sprang forward. Blood arced into a basin like a fountain, and you nearly dropped the thing from shock. The merchant didn't scream. He just groaned, eyes rolling back, as if some pressure had been released. After a pint or so, Willem declared him restored. The man wobbled to his feet and left, looking paler but strangely satisfied. And so began your long, sticky relationship with bloodletting. In theory, it makes sense. Too much blood causes heat, fever, anger. Let some out, and you rebalance the system. The problem is knowing how much to take. A few ounces, and nothing happens. Too much, and the patient might faint, or worse. You always err on the side of caution, though Master Willem used to say, "A pale man can be fed, a dead man cannot." Comforting. You've done it dozens of times, now young, old, male, female, rich, poor. Everyone bleeds the same. Well, mostly. One elderly woman's blood came out so sluggish and dark, you actually stepped back. Black bile rising, you whispered, which sounded impressive, even though you were secretly horrified. You've got your routine down. Tie the arm, warm the skin, check for a good vein. You say something calming, just a prick, then we'll be done, and hope they don't ask questions. You press the phlegm, make the cut, and collect the blood in a shallow bowl. If they get woozy, you give them rosemary to sniff. If they faint, well, it happens. The blood itself tells you things, or so you pretend. Bright, red, and frothy. Too much heat in the heart. Dark and sluggish. A liver problem. You say these things with confidence, even though deep down, all blood looks fairly bloody. Some patients ask for it. They come in flushed and sweating, convinced their humors are boiling over, and beg you to take a pint or two. Others need convincing. You tell them stories of nobles who bled monthly as a preventative measure, or that famous monk who swore he cured his melancholia by letting blood during the full moon. Historians still debate whether bloodletting was more ritual than remedy, but to you, it's both. It's medicine and it's theater. You once had to bleed a man who refused to look. He turned his head, squeezed his eyes shut, and whimpered, the whole time like a child. Afterward, he gave you a silver coin and said it was the bravest he'd ever been. You told him he was a model patient. You lied. Not every bleeding goes smoothly. Sometimes the vein refuses to yield. Sometimes the blade skips. You once nicked a tendon and had to bandage the man's whole arm just to stop the bleeding. Another time, the blood wouldn't stop at all, and you ended up stuffing the wound with wool soaked in vinegar. It worked, sort of. He limped for a week. But worst of all are the faints. The moment when a patient goes limp mid-bleed, and you're left holding a bowl of blood and a rapidly graying face. You yell for help, slap their cheeks, wave vinegar under their nose. Most recover. A few don't. You tell yourself it wasn't the bloodletting. It was their humors. A fever too strong, a heart too weak. Anything but your own mistake. Still, you keep doing it because it's expected. Because it often does make people feel better, if only from the attention. Because you don't have better options. You've also experimented with cupping, placing heated glass cups on the skin to draw blood toward the surface. It looks dramatic. Big purple welts rising like bruised fruit. Patients find it impressive. You tell them it clears stagnant blood. In truth, you're not sure it does anything except leave them looking like they've been attacked by an octopus. But they like the marks, makes them feel treated. Sometimes you combine cupping and cutting, the scarification method. It sounds horrifying, and it sort of is. You scratch the skin with a small blade, place a warm cup over it, and watch as blood pools inside like magic. People talk about it in hushed tones at the market. Did you hear? He had the cups. You try to space out your bloodletting patients. Too many in a day, and your hands ache from squeezing cloths and tying straps. Plus, the smell of old blood lingers. You've started burning rosemary just to mask it. Even Gerard, the rat, avoids the corner where you dump the used linens. Despite all this, there are days when you feel like a true physician. You make a diagnosis, perform the bleed, and the patient walks out looking lighter whether from relief or actual blood loss. Who's to say? And sometimes you see real results. A man feverish and half mad, suddenly lucid after a careful letting, a woman with a swollen face breathing easier after her treatment. Are these coincidences? Maybe. But they're the moments that keep you going. And besides, in this town, you're the best option people have. You're not a barber, not a traveling charlatan. You're the doctor, the one who knows which vein to slice, how to clean a phlegm without dulling it, and what prayer to mutter when the bleeding won't stop. You wipe your tools, rinse the bowl, and toss the used cloth into the corner. You sit back, light a fresh candle, and listen to the quiet drip of rain outside. You'll bleed 3 more people before the day is done. You already know it. Your fingers still smell faintly of iron as you reach for the next patient's pouch. It's filled not with coin, but with herbs crushed, dried, and wrapped in fabric that was once white. The woman before you is smiling proudly. From my garden, she says. Foxglove, wormwood, and some bits for your belly. You nod politely and accept the gift, though you'll spend half an hour later checking whether she's brought you poison, weeds, or both. Herbal remedies are the soul of your practice. They're what people expect. Roots, leaves, seeds, powders, potions. Everyone believes in herbs. Even if they don't believe in you, you have your favorites. Chamomile for nerves, sage for sore throats, mint for nausea, and rosemary for everything. Not because it works for everything, but because it smells nice enough to make people think it does. You once treated a man for brain fog with a rosemary-scented cloth tied around his head. He said it helped him remember the names of his sheep. You chose not to ask how he forgot them in the first place. The real art lies in preparation. You've spent years learning how to mash, grind, steep, and dry herbs until they look and smell medicinal. Master Willem taught you to never let your remedies look too familiar. The more mysterious it seems, he'd say, the better it heals. Take garlic, for example. Everyone uses it in cooking, but mash it with vinegar and crush it into a warm paste, and suddenly it's a chest poultice. Add a whisper about its hot and dry properties, and voila, it's a treatment for congestion. You've had people swear that your garlic remedy saved them from death. Historians still debate whether most of these treatments were genuinely helpful or just oddly seasoned placebos. But it hardly matters when the coughing stops. You keep your ingredients in labeled jars, though some labels have faded into educated guesswork. One, you think, says marigold might actually be mustard seed. Another just says for cough strong, you use it sparingly. Your mortar and pestle are your Preda heavy stone set that belonged to Willem's master before him. You like the rhythm of grinding, the circular motion, the earthy scent rising from the crushed herbs. It's one of the few parts of your work that feels like peace. But not all recipes are comforting. Some are questionable. There's one for a salve that includes pigeon droppings, though you're convinced Willem made that one up just to see if you'd touch it. Another calls for mashed snails. You tried it once. It did not go well. There's a recipe you use often, though equal parts honey, vinegar, and thyme, warmed gently over the brazier. You give it for coughs, sore throats, even heartbreak. No one's sure what it actually cures, but it tastes sweet and makes people feel looked after. You call it the soothing tonic. Patients call it the good stuff. Some remedies are passed down through town gossip. Boil nettles with goat's milk for muscle aches. Rub crushed mint leaves on your temples before sleep. Bury onions at the full moon to prevent toothache. You don't argue. If someone believes strongly enough, the herbs almost work by sheer confidence. You once encountered a wandering herbalist who claimed to cure blindness with boiled sheep, eyes, and dandelion wine. He had a charming accent and 3 missing fingers. You listened politely, then traded him a pouch of your dried lavender for a tale about treating a king's gout with crushed bees. You've since learned never to trust a man who wears more than 1 feather in his hat. Back in your shop, you spend an hour every week restocking. You tie bundles of thyme, sage, and lavender with twine and hang them from the rafters. When they dry, you crumble them into clay bowls. Gerard the rat once tried to eat your stash of chamomile. He slept for 12 hours afterward. You considered that proof of efficacy. Not all treatments are ingested. You make poulticized thick pastes of herbs wrapped in cloth and pressed against the skin. They smell like damp salad and fall apart at the worst moments, but people swear by them. Then there are infusion herbs steeped in hot water, served in cracked cups, sometimes with honey if you're feeling generous, and ointments, of course. Beeswax melted with oil and mixed with whatever healing herb seems appropriate. You keep a jar labeled universal salve. It works on bruises, cuts, rashes, and egos, mostly egos. Sometimes you wonder how much of this actually helps. You've seen miraculous recoveries and bitter failures. You once made a salve for a child's fever that seemed to do nothing, but her mother insisted it cured her within hours. Another time, your tincture gave someone hives. You told him it was a purging reaction, and he thanked you. There's one strange memory you always come back to. A woman came in weeping, claiming her heart ached not physically, but with grief. You gave her a small vial of rose water and told her to place a few drops on her tongue each night. She returned a week later with clearer eyes and a lighter step. It worked, she said. You said nothing. You just nodded at the end of the day. You believe in your herbs, not because they always cure, but because they offer something even rarer: comfort, ritual, the feeling of being seen. And if the remedy smells nice, even better. You cork the last jar of the day, wipe your hands on your apron, and take a deep breath. Your little room smells like a forest, a garden, and a kitchen all at once. You don't have much, but you have a table, your tools, and a growing pile of strange little miracles. You're just finishing a poultice when your next patient arrives, not with a symptom, but with a question. Is it a good day for healing? You glance out the shutter at the pale gray sky. The answer, of course, lies not in the weather but in the stars. Astrology governs more of your work than you'd care to admit. It's not that you truly believe Mars causes nosebleeds, or that Jupiter's alignment with Cancer makes childbirth more dangerous, it's that your patients do. And so, by necessity, so do you. You nod slowly, thoughtfully, as if consulting some vast celestial map in your head. Yes, you say, Venus is ascendant. The air favors warmth. We may proceed. Astrological charts hang beside your herb, bundles tucked between anatomical drawings and smudged diagrams of the 4 humors. The symbols, strange little fish, lions, horns, and waves mean more to your patients than the names of any bones or muscles. You pretend they mean a lot to you, too. You remember learning to cast charts in your apprenticeship, Willem insisted. On it. You'll lose half your clients if you ignore the heavens, he said, stabbing a finger at a chart while you tried to remember what house Mercury ruled. The truth was, you struggled with the math. Figuring out planetary hours and moon phases required a kind of patience that often clashed with your need to boil time or scrape pus from a wound. But still you learned. You memorized enough to offer safe advice. A choleric imbalance during a waning moon can be soothed but not cured, or surgery is dangerous under Aries. And if you didn't know what to say, you'd mumble something about Saturn and change the subject. Historians still debate how seriously medieval doctors relied on astrology. Some say it was pure performance. Others argue it guided real decisions. For you, it's both. When someone demands to know if it's safe to treat their kidney stones today, and you know they won't let you near them unless Mars approves, then you suddenly become very invested in Mars. You keep a small wooden box of star charts behind your work table, worn soft with handling. There's one for bloodletting, another for childbirth, a third for general melancholia. You've spilled tea on them more than once, but you just pretend the stains are divine signs. Astrology also determines when you treat people. A man once showed up foaming at the mouth after being kicked by a mule, and his wife insisted you wait until the hour of Jupiter. You gently explained that he might not make it to Jupiter's hour, and eventually she relented. You stitched him up under Saturn and hoped it didn't count as malpractice. You once had to reschedule an entire day's worth of appointments because Mercury went into retrograde. A noblewoman told you her child's nosebleeds were cosmic punishments and insisted on a lunar blessing. You gave her a phial of moon-charged rosewater and reminded her to hold it in her left hand at dawn. She wept with gratitude. The trickiest part is when people ask you to predict things. Will I recover? Will the baby survive? Is it safe to travel next week? You could give the same answer every time maybe, but instead, you shuffle your charts, pretend to read a pattern, and deliver something vague but hopeful. The stars suggest a turning. Be cautious, but walk forward. It's all anyone wants, really. A reason to believe. And then there are the skeptics. Not many, but they exist. One older man snorted at your star chart once and said, "If Jupiter knew how bad my knees hurt, he'd do something about it." You offered him a salve and said, "Perhaps he just did." He didn't laugh, but he came back the next week. Your favorite part, if you're being honest, is the ritual. Lighting a candle before casting a chart, drawing the symbols in chalk, whispering the names of the planets as if they're listening. It feels ancient, mysterious, a bit like magic. And in a world where most of your job involves pus, pain, and guessing games, a little magic helps you sleep at night. You've even begun adding small notes to your ledger beside patient names. Born under Leo, responds well to hot compresses, or Moon in Pisces, emotional but compliant. You tell yourself it helps you understand them better, but deep down, you know it just makes the work more interesting some evenings. When the sky is clear and your candle burns low, you step outside and look up. The stars are small, cold, pinpricks indifferent, ancient. They don't whisper secrets, but they do shine, even when the world is falling apart beneath them. That's enough. You once saw a shooting star while applying a poultice to a child's forehead. His mother gasped and crossed herself. "A sign," she said. You nodded, though you weren't sure if it was good or bad. "The stars favor him," you said quietly. "He recovered within the week." You never forget that moment. You glance at your wall chart again. Mars has moved into Scorpio. It's probably time to stop prescribing hot compresses, but you'll keep doing it for one more day. You wrap a fresh cloth around your satchel, adjust your cloak against the wind, and sigh. It's time for a house call again. You don't mind the walking, what you mind is the getting there. The streets are never dry. Even in summer, something is always dripping, oozing, or squelching underfoot. Today it's a mixture of rain and something you suspect may have once been cabbage soup, or worse. The air is damp and smells of wet wool, spoiled vegetables, and, faintly, pig. A cart nearly rolls over your foot, its driver shouting apologies while the back wheel sloshes through a puddle that sprays up your trousers. You do not apologize when you glare at him. House calls are a constant in your work. The sick can't always reach your practices, especially if they're rich, dying, or dramatically bedridden. Sometimes all three. So you walk through alleys and courtyards, up slippery wooden stairs, and into whatever little universe your patient lives in. Each one is a new adventure. Today, you've been summoned to the weaver's cottage. He's an older man with a chronic cough and a wife who believes in evil spirits. You've treated him before with mullein tea and a warning to avoid cold drafts. But apparently the spirits are back. You duck through the low door into a smoky one-room home. The hearth is blazing, the air thick with the smell of burnt bread and something acrid you don't want to identify. The wife is fanning his face with a sprig of juniper. "He's got a heaviness in his chest again," she says, not looking at you. "It's the spirits. They came in the night." You nod, not wanting to argue. You kneel beside the old man, take his wrist, pulse faint, skin clammy, chest sounds like a rattle in a barrel. You sigh softly. It's not spirits, it's age, damp lungs, and years of breathing in loom dust. "Stew," you murmur a few words, wave your hand as if warding something away, and place a warm cloth soaked in mustard over his chest. He groans. She crosses herself. You've done what you can. Historians still debate how much medieval physicians believed in spiritual causes of illness. The church certainly promoted the idea that sin and sickness were closely tied, but in practice, most doctors, like you, to treat body and belief at the same time. You stand to leave, promising to return in 2 days. She presses a loaf of dense barley bread into your hands. Payment of sorts. The rain has picked up. You wrap the bread and head to your next stop, a brewer's apprentice who claims his foot is rotting off. When you arrive, he's limping, dramatically, but the foot in question looks mostly damp, a little raw. You ask how long he's had the wound. "Since I stepped in something foul near the tannery," he says. "Of course, the tannery." You clean it with vinegar, apply a simple salve, and tell him to keep it dry. He looks doubtful. His job involves hauling sloshing barrels in a cellar. You consider wrapping the foot in waxed linen, but you're out. Instead, you tie a scrap of oiled cloth and hope for the best. After a few more calls, a young boy with worms, you suggest garlic and fasting. A maid with melancholy nerves, lavender and quiet walks. You find yourself walking home through the evening mist. Your feet are soaked, your knees ache, and your back has developed a crick that won't quit. The town is quieter now. The market's closed, the air thick with chimney smoke and the distant clang of bells. Cats prowl along the rooftops. Someone sings off-key behind a shutter. You pause for a moment under a wooden awning to shake the rain from your shoulders. House calls are exhausting, but also necessary. You learn more in a peasant's cottage than you do from any textbook. You see how people live, what they eat, how they sleep, what they believe. You hear their fears and hopes whispered over stew pots and under prayer candles, and sometimes you realize their illnesses are born as much from the world around them as from within. You once visited a house where 4 children slept in the same bed, coughing into each other's hair. The air was damp, the floor cold stone, the mother desperate. You gave them dried elderflower and told them to boil it with honey. It probably didn't help much, but she smiled at you with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you, doctor." That smile stayed with you longer than the cold did. And then there was the rich merchant's home 3 stories tall, thick tapestries, clean linens, and still the man trembled with fever in a golden bed. You brought him fennel and wine, and he asked if death could be delayed until spring. You said yes. He died 3 days later. The poor believe in spirits. The rich believe in timing. But everyone, no matter their station, believes in you. You reach your practice just as the last light fades. You shake the water from your cloak, unwrap the soggy bread, and set it by the fire to dry. Your hands are raw, your legs ache, but you're home. You light a fresh candle, breathe in the scent of herbs and smoke, and begin mixing a new batch of tonic. Tomorrow will bring more knocks, more puddles, more patience with jars and bruises and mysterious dreams. But for now, you sit in the flickering light, warming your hands and listening to the rain. You barely get through half your bowl of turnip stew before the knock comes. Not a gentle tap more, like someone trying to punch the door off its hinges. You freeze, spoon halfway to your mouth, and wait. Maybe they'll go away. They don't. You sigh, wrap your cloak back around your shoulders, and open the door to find a servant standing in the rain, cloaked in black and sweating through his hat. The Lord, he pants. He's unwell. Of course he is. You've treated your fair share of nobility, though treated is a generous word. Nobles don't want your opinion. They want miracles. Fast ones, quiet ones, preferably with scented cloths and no bodily fluids. You grab your good case, with the least rusty tools, and follow the servant through the night streets. He doesn't slow for puddles, and you soon find yourself soaked again, boots squelching. The manor is on a hill, looming above the town with torchlit windows and guards who eye you like a stray dog. Inside, it smells of wine, wet wool, and the kind of heavy perfume that tries to cover up rot. The Lord is in bed, a huge, ornate thing carved with lions and saints, piled high with furs. He's flushed, twitching, and babbling about wolves in his belly. 2 ladies hover nearby, whispering and dabbing at his forehead with what looks like embroidery cloth. You've seen this kind of illness before. Fever, sweat, confusion. It could be anything. Infection, bad wine, or simply a rich man's nervous breakdown. But you can't say that. You kneel beside the bed and press 2 fingers to his wrist. Pulse, fast and thready. Skin, clammy, breath, smells of spoiled apples. Not good. What can you do for him? One of the ladies hisses. She's dressed in silks, finer than your entire income. Her tone says, fix him. Or else, you take a long breath and say, he's suffering from an imbalance of humors. The heat must be drawn out. Always a safe bet. You prepare a compress of vinegar and rose petals it, more for the scent than the healing, and place it on his forehead. You ask for a bowl of warm wine and mix in crushed willow bark. Then, with all the ceremony you can muster, you begin a gentle bloodletting from his forearm. His eyes flutter, and he groans. One of the ladies gasps. He's speaking in tongues. You calmly reply, that's a good sign. You have no idea if it is. Historians still debate whether doctors like you were more feared or revered by the upper class. In truth, it's a fine line. If you fail, you're a fraud. If you succeed, you're a miracle worker until the next fever. You've learned to never promise anything, only to say things like we must wait for the balance to shift, or the body resists healing before dawn. Vague, mystical, and unprovable, and oddly comforting. The bleeding slows. You clean the wound with wine and wrap it in fine linen, noting the difference from your usual rough scraps. Then you mix a sleeping draft poppy seed, chamomile, and a drop of honey and ease it into his mouth. He swallows, barely. His breathing deepens. The room quiets. One of the ladies wipes her eyes. The servant murmurs, thanks. You are not thanked, not directly. Instead, you're handed a pouch of coins, more than your last 6 house calls combined, and told to return in the morning. You nod, bow, and retreat, still dripping wet, the weight of responsibility and coin jangling in your satchel. As you step outside, the night air hits you like a slap. You pull your cloak tighter and trudge back toward your practice, wondering if the Lord will be alive come sunrise. You've done all you can once. Years ago, you failed to save a baron's son. A fever too swift, lungs filled with fluid. You tried everything, bleeding, cupping, hot stones, even prayers whispered while no one watched. The boy died anyway. The next morning, they told you never to return. You weren't punished, exactly, but your name was whispered in the market for weeks, and no noble called for you for months. That's the danger of treating lords. Success is invisible. Failure is eternal. Still, the coin helps. You buy better herbs, replace your dullest scalpel, and tuck the rest away. Maybe one day you'll use it to build a better practice. One with 2 chairs, a proper roof, walls that don't weep in the rain. You get home just as the candle gutters out. You strip off your wet clothes, eat the last bite of now cold stew, and collapse onto your cot. You dream of wolves in your belly. Asterisk, it's market day, and that means crowds, shuffling feet, shouting vendors, squawking chickens, and the occasional scuffle over a bruised turnip. For you, it also means customers, lots of them. Everyone suddenly remembers their aches, their fevers, their strangely colored rashes. And since your shop is tucked between the alehouse and the man who sharpens sickles, you're perfectly placed for walk-ins. This morning's first visitor isn't sequel, not in the usual sense. He's a blacksmith with a toothache so bad. He's speaking through one side of his mouth. You take one look and know it needs pulling. He knows it too. That's why he's been avoiding you for 3 weeks. He sits on the infamous stool, clutching his knee, as if it will somehow help. and mutters, "Let's just get it over with." You nod, reach under your bench, and pull out the tooth key. It's a brutal-looking thing, shaped like a door handle, with a small claw at the end. You clean it quickly, not because it'll help, but because he's watching and place a small linen pad on his chest to catch the blood. "Bite this," you say, handing him a strip of leather, "and think of something pleasant." Historians still debate whether medieval tooth extraction was truly the most feared treatment or simply the most memorable. You're firmly in the feared camp, especially when the patient starts sweating before you've even touched him. You wedge the tooth key into his mouth, find the offending molar, and turn hard. There's a crunch, a groan, a muffled shout, and a wet pop. The tooth comes out bloody and cracked at the root. He stares at it in your hand like it's a newborn child. You rinse his mouth with strong wine and give him a cloth to bite down on. "Don't chew anything harder than porridge for a few days," you say. He tries to speak, then thinks better of it and simply nods. Tooth pulling isn't technically your job. It belongs to the barberzos jacks of all trades who cut hair, let blood, and yank teeth in open markets with disturbing flair. But when someone's in pain and you're nearby with pliers and a steady hand, they'll take your help. Besides, you've developed a bit of a reputation. People say you're gentler than the barber and only slightly less terrifying than the friar with the forceps. High praise. You've seen it all: broken teeth, abscesses the size of walnuts, gums so inflamed they pulse with every heartbeat. Once, a man had a piece of wood jammed between two molars. He'd tried to pick them clean with a splinter and forgot about it. Another came in with a coin melted to a filling. You didn't ask. You also offer dentifrice's crumbly powders made of crushed sage, salt, and sometimes oyster shell. You tell people to rub it on their teeth with a cloth. It freshens the breath, you say, though you know the effect is temporary at best. Still, it's better than the usual mouth stench of half-rotten onions and despair. Tooth pain isn't just annoying, it's constant. It makes people desperate. You've had grown men cry, women faint, and children throw shoes at you. One boy screamed so loudly, mid-pull, that 2 chickens fled the shop. You still find feathers now and then. There's no anesthesia, of course, just strong drink, distraction, and a prayer that you get it done in one go. You've learned to hum softly while you work something calming, wordless. It helps a little. You once tried using poppy syrup to numb a man before extraction. It worked so well he fell asleep mid-procedure and bit your finger. You haven't used it since. Your tools aren't fancy. You've got the tooth key, a sturdy pair of iron pliers, and a wedge you carved yourself to hold mouths open. You keep them wrapped in cloth, away from your surgical blades. They have a personality of their own, temperamental, sharp, and untrustworthy. In wet weather, despite the gore, the drama, the occasional projectile vomit, you don't mind pulling teeth. There's something satisfying about it. The problem is clear. The treatment is painful, yes, but immediate, and the relief is real. You've seen patients go from sobbing to grinning, bloody grinning, but still in under 5 minutes. Not all jobs give you that. By midday, you've pulled 2 molars, packed 1 abscess with honey and salt, and sent a young woman away with a clove to chew for a mild ache. She was more nervous about the smell of your shop than the pain. You take that as a compliment. Outside, the market is still buzzing. Someone's roasting chestnuts nearby, and the scent drifts through your open shutter. You step outside for a moment, letting the sun hit your face. Your hands are sticky, your back hurts. But you helped people today. That counts for something. As you look down the street, you spot the town barber sharpening his tools in the square. Surrounded by cars, he's wearing that ridiculous red and white apron again, brandishing a tooth in one hand like it's a trophy. You roll your eyes. He always was a show-off. Still, he sends patients your way when he's had too much ale. And you do the same when your wrists give out. It's a strange camaraderie, built on mutual respect and an unspoken agreement. Don't yank if you're drunk. You head back inside, tuck your tools away, and wash your hands in water gone brown from use. Tomorrow will bring another wave of aching jaws, swollen cheeks, and herbal requests for fresh breath. And as long as people keep getting cavities and bad advice from grandmothers, you'll keep pulling teeth. The knock on your door this time isn't tentative. It's urgent, sharp, and fast. The kind of knock that says, someone's bleeding, and it's not the good kind. You're already moving before the second hit lands. A boy, breathless, mud up to his knees, blurts. He's cut deep in the thigh. You grab your satchel, your knife roll, your strongest linen, and run. By the time you reach the farmhouse, the air is thick with panic. You step through the threshold into a scene of blood and hay and sweat. Your usual operating room. The patient is sprawled on a rough bench. It's not the worst you've shunned, but it's close. You drop to your knees, unroll your tools, and say, boil water. Another clamps down on the patient's shoulders. Surgery, for you, is the art of controlled panic. There's no anesthesia, no antiseptic, just speed, skill, and enough grit to keep your hands steady while the room around you collapses into chaos. You clean the wound quickly with wine. His eyes roll back. You mutter a prayer not for him, but for your amen. Slide your fingers in to find the severed vessel. You clamp it with a curved hook, twist tight, and press a wad of linen into the cut. His body spasms. Blood flows, slows, stops. You breathe. One crisis down, now comes the stitching. You thread a needle with gut, boiled yesterday, and begin sewing the flesh back together. Your fingers sticky, your vision clouded by sweat. His leg jerks with every poke. You've broken needles before this one holds. Historians still argue whether medieval surgery was more butchery than science. Most patients survive the injury only to succumb to infection, fever, or simply the shock. But sometimes you save them. You finish the last stitch, tie it off, and bind the leg tight with clean bandages. The boy has passed out, breathing, ragged but steady. You tell the family what to do: keep him warm, change the dressings, watch for fever. Then you stand, your knees cracking, your back soaked. One of the older women presses a cloth to your hands. The water turns red, almost. Immediately you remember the first time you operated. It was a crushed finger. Simple, in theory. But the man wouldn't stop twitching. You sliced too slowly. It got messy. You fainted. You did, eventually. You don't faint anymore. You've amputated a toe. Lanced boils the size of apples. Removed splinters so deep they reached bone. Once, you extracted a sewing needle from someone's neck using only a mirror and a good guess. He lived, and he still waves at you when he sees you in the market. From a safe distance, you keep a tray of surgical tools separate from the rest blades of varying lengths. But when you grab the hook or the whisper, you know exactly what to do. Some patients want you to pray before you begin. Others want silence. You give them both in equal measure. Someone knows what they're doing while their world is bleeding out onto the floor. You've developed your own rituals. You always roll up your sleeves 3 times. You say the same 3 words before every cut. We begin now. You've lost patience. Of course you have. One man bled out before you could even open your satchel. A child seized in your arms while you tried to lance an abscess near the spine. A young woman died from fever after you removed a shard of glass from her leg. You remember them all, ink, but you've saved some too. You've seen wounds heal, pain subside, lives continue. One man you stitched up in the dark came back a month later with a loaf of bread and a quiet smile. Still hurts when it rains, he said, but I'm alive. That's enough. You return home long after sunset. You boil your tools in wine and rosemary, scrub your hands with salt, and collapse into your stool. Gerard the rat noses at a bloodied cloth and decides he's not that hungry. You take a sip of cold tea and stare at the flame of your candle. Tomorrow, someone will knock again, and you'll be ready, because no one else is. Asterisk, there's a strange hush in the street this morning. No shouting merchants, no gossiping washerwomen, just silence and smoke. You step outside and catch the scent. Burnt herbs, scorched wood, something wrong. Not the usual wrong, something darker. You feel it in your chest before you see the cluster of people at the far end of the alley, huddled around a cart. The plague has arrived. You've heard rumors for weeks now. A monastery sealed off by its own monks, a ship that docked full of corpses. But rumors are like foggies to ignore until they settle on your doorstep today. A body lies in the back, wrapped in linen that's soaked through at the stomach and neck. The woman beside it is trembling, eyes wide, and muttering prayers you don't recognize. Someone whispers, "He died in a day. Just yesterday. He was fine." You step back. You know the signs. Sudden fever, vomiting, purple boils, buboes under the arms and groin, and the stench, not just of death, but of corruption, like meat left in the sun. You rush back to your practice, bar the door, and light a brazier of rosemary. You breathe through a cloth tied over your mouth, though you know it won't help. You do it anyway. You pull out the beaked mask. You hate it. It's hot, claustrophobic, and the lenses fog up with your breath, but it's your armor now. You pretend that will filter the air. Historians still debate whether the beak masks actually worked or were just a psychological buffer for physicians. They make you feel like you're doing something in the face of helplessness, because truthfully, you can't stop this. You can treat symptoms, ease suffering, maybe delay death, but the plague doesn't care about poultices or prayers. It moves through the air, or the water, or the rats, or maybe even glances. No one knows. And that's the worst part. The next few days pass in a blur of coughing, panic, and prayers. People knock in the middle of the night, screaming about boils and bleeding mouths. You answer every time, even though your hands tremble with each new case. You treat the symptoms as best you can. Poultices of onion and lard, vinegar, compresses, tinctures of myrrh and garlic. You boil everything, burn the linens, scrub your Tools until your knuckles bleed, but still they die. You see it in their eyes, the moment when they know, that cold, distant stare, like they're already fading. You hold their hands, you speak gently, you tell them you're strong. You'll fight this. Sometimes they believe you. Sometimes you believe yourself. You keep a separate ledger now, near your window. You begin sleeping with a cloth over your mouth. It doesn't help. Gerard the rat is gone. You don't know when he left. You hope it wasn't the fleas. You light candles for the ones who pass, even the ones you barely knew. You say their names aloud, softly, like charms. Ansel, Mariette, Tomas. It doesn't help, but you do it anyway. The town begins to shut down. Market stalls are empty. Streets echo with silence. Church bells toll far too often. Now you're a symbol of death. You treat a young girl who reminds you of your niece-wide eyes, tangled hair, fever that won't break. She dies before sunset. You leave the house in silence. You don't cry. You haven't in days. But your hands shake when you boil your tools, and you scrub until the skin peels. You keep your ledger open, a candle burning beside it. One night, you dream of masks, of them with empty eyes and beaks filled with ashes. You wake gasping and pour vinegar on your floor, as if it'll cleanse your dreams. But the plague doesn't sleep. It comes for children and elders, bakers and blacksmiths. It doesn't care how clean your hands are. And still, you show up. You wear the mask. You boil the herbs. You keep a cloth soaked in rosemary tied to your wrist and inhale it every time your courage falters. Because if you stop, who will be left? It starts with whispers, then eyes, then doors that don't open anymore when you knock. You've become something else in the eyes of the town. Now not a healer, not even a man, but a walking omen. The mask doesn't help. You know it's meant to protect you, but to them it's the face of death. Children cry when they see you. Old women cross themselves. Even people you've known for years pull their shawls tighter and back away when you pass. There's a knock at your door now. Not a patient, but the town warden and 2 guards in thick cloaks. They don't come in. They stand just outside your threshold, like you're contagious by proximity. One of them holds a rolled parchment. The council says your practice is to remain open, but you are not to leave the premises unless summoned, the warden says. His tone is carefully neutral. He's afraid. Everyone is. You're to burn all waste outside the gate. No one wants the pestilence leaking into the street. You nod slowly. You don't argue. What's there to argue with? Fear has its own laws. Quarantine begins. Not official, not enforced by chains or padlocks, just distance, suspicion, and silence. You become an island inside your own walls. Patients still come, but only when they have no other option. They knock and retreat. Leave bundles on your step, jars of urine, bundles of herbs, scribbled notes on scraps of parchment. You read them, diagnose, prepare treatments, and leave them in a wooden box outside the door. Most are picked up. A few aren't. You stop wondering why. One day, someone hurls a rock at your window. It cracks the pane, the only one you have, and knocks a jar of dried thyme to the floor. No one comes to apologize. You sweep it up in silence. You've become a fixture now, a figure behind fogged glass, part doctor, part ghost. Historians still argue whether plague doctors were respected or feared more, but in your case, the line has disappeared. You are both revered for trying, feared for what follows. You try not to blame them. Panic is a kind of fever. It distorts faces, tightens fists, makes neighbors into threats. You've seen it burn through villages faster than any disease. Still, it hurts. You once tried to visit a patient who hadn't shown up for treatment. His wife screamed when she saw you and slammed the door in your face. You stood there for a long time, listening to her sob through the wood. Eventually, the warden brings you a list, names, addresses, the ones no one else will see, he says, the ones already half dead. You're to check on them alone. Quietly, you begin making rounds at dusk, when the streets are emptiest. You wear the mask, carry your satchel like a weapon, and speak only in soft tones. Some doors don't open, others do, revealing gaunt faces and shaking hands. You kneel beside cots in silent rooms, clean wounds, change linens, offer broth if there's any to give. Sometimes all you do is listen. Sometimes they ask if they're going to die. You never lie. You just say, "I'll do what I can." You burn everything after rags, cloths, spoiled herbs. You dig a pit in the back garden and pour vinegar around it. You wash your hands until the skin cracks, and then wrap them in linen soaked in honey. One morning, a loaf of bread appears on your step. No note, still warm. You break it carefully and eat it in silence, unsure if it's a gift, a peace offering, or a last meal. Later that day, someone spits at your window. A child. His mother doesn't scold him. She pulls him away, quickly, like you're a cursed statue that just moved. You think of leaving, packing your tools, burning what you can't carry, and walking until the air smells clean again. But you don't, because even as the world closes around you, someone always knocks. And even if they're afraid, they still believe you might help. That maybe, in this flood of death and rumor, you are a sandbag holding back the tide. You repair the cracked window with cloth and wax. You light your herbs. You boil water. You restock your poultices and sharpen your blades. You cannot cure the plague, but you can do this. You can stand between the door and the dark. Asterisk, the knock tonight is different. Not urgent, not desperate, just ... hesitant. 3 light taps. As though the person behind the door isn't entirely sure they want to be there. You lift the edge of the curtain and peek outside. A girl, maybe 16, barefoot, clutching a wooden figure of a saint, like it's the only thing keeping her upright. You open the door slowly, not stepping out. She doesn't move forward either. "My mother," she says, voice trembling. "She's not sick, not in her body. It's a curse," the priest said. The shadows move when she prays. You nod. Of course they do. This isn't the first time you've been asked to treat something not entirely medical. You see just as much superstition as sickness, perhaps more. And if there's one thing you've learned, it's that dismissing someone's belief never heals them. You tell the girl you'll come tomorrow, at dawn, when the air is clean. She nods quickly and runs off, barefoot again, the saint dangling from her wrist by a thread. You close the door and begin your preparations. You'll need valerian root, a vial of rosewater, and yes, a handful of crushed poppy seeds, but also something extra, something that looks sacred. You dig through your shelf and find the piece of cloth embroidered with gold thread. You don't remember where it came from, but it looks suitably mystical. Superstition is a second language here. People believe in curses, charms, spirits, and signs, more so when the world is falling apart. And frankly, you can't blame them. Historians still debate how much of medieval medical care was medicine and how much was theater. In your experience, it's usually both. You can apply a poultice and murmur a charm at the same time. You can crush herbs with one hand and scatter salt across a threshold with the other. The line between doctor and magician is thinner than a herald. Sometimes being both is the only way someone believes they can be healed. You've burned rosemary to chase out spirits, drawn chalk symbols on floorboards, even instructed someone to sleep with garlic cloves beneath their bed to catch the night sickness. Once, you blessed a loaf of bread and called it protective food. The man who ate it claimed his dreams were lighter for a week. You remember one patient who was convinced a neighbor had cursed her cow with a crooked eye. She came to you, not the priest, because she said you had the practical knowledge. You gave her a tonic, instructed her to bury a clove of garlic at the cow's left hoof and sprinkle vinegar at the barn's threshold. The cow recovered. She still thanks you every market day. You've learned to listen to the real illness beneath the curse. It's often grief, or fear, or loneliness, and sometimes it's something physical, dressed up in mystery. A child who won't stop screaming isn't possessed, he's teething. A woman who sees spirits at night isn't cursed, she's starved of sleep and full of fever. You treat the body, you soothe the soul. You show up at the girl's house just after dawn, exactly as promised. The mother lies on a straw mat, eyes wide, hands twitching at her sides. Her breath comes in short gasps. The room smells of mildew and incense. You kneel, you don't speak. You place a warm cloth on her chest, gently rub her temples with the rose oil, and begin to hum. Not a song, just sound, steady, low, comforting. The girl watches from the corner, fingers clenched around her wooden saint. You scatter a circle of dried valerian root and sprinkle a little wine near the door. Then you touch the mother's hand and say softly, "This will pass," and it does. Eventually, her breath slows. Her eyes soften, she blinks. The girl gasps. You pack your things quietly and leave behind a small bundle of herbs. "Burn this before sundown," you say. "No shadows will remain." She thanks you like you've saved a life. Maybe you have. You return to your practice, where someone's already left a basket of eggs and a note that says, "Is it true moonlight causes ulcers?" You'll answer that one later. It's easy to laugh at these beliefs in theory, less so when you see what they do, how they bind people together, how they give the frightened something to hold, a chant, a gesture, a candle lit on a windowsill. You once met a friar who said that medicine was about healing the image people carry of themselves. You've thought about that a lot. You're not sure it's entirely wrong, so you keep your special shelf. The charms, the powders, the little glass stones you tell people were collected during a solar eclipse. Do they heal? Who knows? Do they help? Yes, and helping is the job. Even if it means pretending you believe that a woman's swollen knee was caused by walking past a cursed stump. You don't argue. You give her a balm and tell her to circle the tree backward 3 times before sleeping. She'll feel better. That's what matters. You're mashing dried fennel in your mortar when the shouting starts. Not angry, shouting loud, boastful, obnoxiously cheerful. You already know who it is. The barber is back in town. You peer through your shutter and spot his cart parked in the square, decorated with red and white cloth, loud bells, and jars of suspiciously colorful liquids. He's wearing a feathered hat again, waving a pair of gleaming scissors in one hand and a small bottle in the other. His assistant is juggling apples, because of course he is. Barbers, they cut hair, yank teeth, lance boils, and hawk miracle tonics that taste like rotted cherries. They call themselves surgeons, physicians, and healers, depending on the day, and, unlike you, they make it all look fun. You watch as the barber climbs atop a stool, pulls a man from the crowd, and yells, "This man's got too much heat in the head, it's boiling up, making him bald. Let's drain it." There's a click, a squelch, a moment of wince-inducing silence, and then the crowd erupts. You shake your head and return to your fennel. It's not jealousy, not exactly, it's just frustrating. You've spent years learning how to feel a pulse, how to read a fever, how to diagnose imbalance by listening to someone breathe. The barber hands out pre-mixed tonics, twirls his mustache, and gets paid double, and still people flock to him. Historians still debate how much training medieval barbers had compared to licensed physicians. But in your daily reality, it hardly matters. They act confident. They smell of cloves and wine. They wear boots without holes. People love that dot. One of your patients, old Tomas, once said, "He may be a showman, but his hand is steady." You couldn't argue. The barber may be flashy, but he's not always wrong. You've seen him set a broken finger with surprising tenderness. You've seen him carry an old woman across a muddy street so she wouldn't miss her bleeding appointment. Still, he once claimed he could cure blindness with pickled carrot juice. That one didn't go over well. You've learned to coexist. He gets the showy cases, the swellings, the bad teeth, the drunkards who want a dramatic leeching. You get the quiet ones, the long illnesses, the worried mothers, the people who want more than just a bottle and a grin. But there are days when you lose patience to him. People who were yours, who trusted you, suddenly decide they'd rather see the man with the bells. They come back days later, their cheeks flushed, their breath sour from mystery tonic, saying, "He said I had shadow fever." He made it sound so simple. You smile politely. You patch them up. You don't say what you're thinking. Sometimes you wonder if you should be more theatrical. Maybe wear a bigger hat. Ring a bell. Let's chase those humors away, or no bile too bitter for me. But it's not you. You can't fake the sparkle. Once, out of curiosity, you visited the barber at dusk, pretended to be a customer. He didn't recognize you at first, furred you a general vigor tonic, and started telling you about your forehead shape. You listened, watched, noted his technique. Later, when you knocked at his wagon and handed him a packet of crushed willow bark for his sore wrist, fair. The truth is, you need each other. He draws the crowd. You treat the ones who didn't get better from the crowd. It's an unspoken agreement, one rooted in necessity. He sends you his tricky cases now and then, a boil too close to the eye, a child with a fever that won't break. You pretend to grumble, but you help. You always help, still. On days like this, when his laughter echoes off the alley walls, and you're inside sniffing, someone's urine, you feel the difference between the two of you in your bones. Your practice doesn't have bells. It doesn't have assistants juggling apples. It has a three-legged stool, a rat named Gerard missing, presumed retired, and a wall full of herbs. And yet, by the end of the day, you've seen 5 patients, listened to their worries, brewed to tonics, pulled a splinter, helped a widow breathe a little easier. No applause, no cheers, just quiet thank yous, and the occasional egg you don't need. The crowd, you just need the work. You light a candle as the sun sets. The barber's cart rolls by, jingling down the street. He winks at your window. You raise your mug of stale tea in reply. You don't compete, you coexist. Let him juggle. You'll heal. Asterisk, you're dozing, chin tucked against your chest, when the bell rings. Not the one on your front step, the other one. The bell you keep tied to the corner of your cot, attached to a string that hangs from the ceiling above your head. A night bell, reserved only for true emergencies. You groan, drag yourself upright, and fumble for your boots. Your candle's nearly spent. The room smells like dried herbs and old sweat, and you haven't eaten since midday. That bell means you're needed. By the time you open the door, the boy's already panting from the run. Please, he gasps. My sister, her belly, it's twisting. You grab your satchel, your heavier cloak, and your smaller knife roll, then follow him into the dark. The streets at night are different, quieter, yes, but alive in a different way. A shutter creaks. There's a hush in the town, like it's holding its breath. You've made night calls before, too many, and they never get easier. There was the baker's wife, who collapsed while walking to the latrine. You arrived to find her gasping face, pale, clutching her chest. She didn't survive the night, and the tanner's boy, who cracked his skull, falling from a hayloft. You stitched his scalp for hours by candlelight, while his mother wept in the doorway. But the most dangerous thing about night calls isn't the illness. Shadows stretch like fingers across your path. You've been followed before once by a group of drunk laborers who thought it funny to pelt you with rotten fruit. Another time by someone who simply breathed behind you until you ducked into a side door. That's why you carry a blade now, tucked in your boot, not for patience, for the living. Tonight, the boy leads you down a twisting lane near the old well. The house is low and damp, pressed against a crumbling stone wall. Inside, the girl lies curled on the floor, moaning. Her hands grip her stomach, sweat beads on her brow. Her breath is ragged. You kneel beside her and begin the work. No pulse in the feet, cramping, swollen belly. Her mother murmurs something about a curse, or spoiled milk, or the evil eye. You nod, offer a whisper of reassurance, and ask for hot water and cloths. Historians still argue whether night visits were more about medical care or social obligation. But to you, they're about timing. Some ailments can't wait for the sun. You mix a draft peppermint, crushed fennel, and Wynand coax her to drink. She does, barely. You press warm compresses to her side. You check for fever. You gently, carefully, trying not to let the worry show on your face. She begins to ease after half an hour. The cramps subside. Her breathing steadied. You sit back, exhausted, and let the mother fall to her knees in thanks as you stand to leave. She presses a wrapped bundle into your hand, bread and cheese still warm. Your voice is gone. The walk home is even quieter. No footsteps, no wind, Just the sound of your own breath in your ears and the distant tolling of a bell from the monastery. You begin to notice details at night that you never see during the day. How the moonlight silvers the eaves, how dew collects on the iron hinges of the butcher's shop, how even the rats move slower after midnight. There's something else, too, a sense of fragility, like the whole town could snap in two if someone coughed too loudly, and you, the one who walks through it all, are both shepherd and witness. You arrive home just before dawn. Your candle has burned to a puddle. The bundle of bread and cheese sits unopened in your hand. You place it gently on your table, remove your cloak, and collapse into your cot, fully clothed. You'll sleep for 2 hours, maybe. Then someone will knock again, because the night never really ends. It just folds into morning, and you'll rise when it does. You've seen your fair share of injuries, axe slips, boiling water burns, nasty cases of I tried to wrestle a goat and lost. But nothing prepares you for the battlefield. Word spreads fast. There's been a skirmish outside the city raiders, or mercenaries, or someone's feud that got out of hand. And now you're being summoned, not by choice, by a rider with a city crest who says, "Doctor, bring what you need." They're waiting. You pack quickly. Bandages, linen, wine, your sharpest knives, and all the dried yarrow you can carry. You don't forget your amputation sawn, not this time. Last time, you had to borrow one. You still think about the sound it made. They escort you out through the city gates, where the air is thick with dust and the metallic smell of blood. The field is chaos, groaning men lying in rows, mud-soaked red, horses rearing in panic, and the sound a low, continuous chorus of pain. You're thrown into it without fanfare. No introductions, no pleasantries, just a man gripping his shoulder and begging you to please cut it off. You kneel beside him, press your hand to the wound. It's too far gone, black at the edges. You look him in the eye and say, "You'll feel everything. I'm sorry." He nods once. That's all the consent you get. You work fast, tie off the limb, slice through muscle, saw through bone, cauterize with a hot iron. He passes out before you're done. No time to breathe. The next man is moaning, gut torn open. You press rags inside, hope to stop the bleeding. He dies anyway. You close his eyes, whisper a word, and move on. This is battlefield medicine. It's brutal, bloody, and barely medicine at all. You're not healing, you're keeping people alive long enough to not die today. Historians still debate how advanced battlefield surgery really was. Some say it was a butcher's job. Others argue it laid the groundwork for real trauma care. You've never cared about the debates. You care about who's still breathing when the sun sets. You set broken bones with wood planks. You sew muscle with coarse thread. You pour vinegar on wounds and hope it keeps rot at bay. You've run out of clean linen within an hour. You tear strips from your own cloak. By midday, you can't feel your knees. Your hands are shaking. The back of your neck is sunburned. You drink from a tin cup passed by a stable boy and don't ask what's in it. You catch yourself humming as you stitch someone's leg closed. It's the same tune you hum during leeching or when boiling herbs. It keeps your mind from breaking. Then comes the boy, maybe 14, still clutching a wooden dagger. His leg is shattered. You know you'll have to take it. You look around, Find a cleanish spot of grass and begin. He screams once, then again, then goes silent. You don't know if it's death or mercy. You pause only once, wiping your hands on your apron, now stiff with blood. You look up at the field. Dozens still wait. Some moan, some stare blankly. Some are already beyond you, and yet a few smile when they see you, reach out, call you miracle worker or Saint Sawbones. You want to laugh or cry. You do neither. There's one man with a gut wound who won't stop singing some battle song about glory and fire. You pack his wound, give him poppy syrup, and let him sing. It's the only thing keeping him upright. You think of your shop, of Gerard, of the candle on your desk, and the gentle smell of dried mint. It feels like a different life. When the sun finally begins to dip, you're covered in grime, sweat, and blood that isn't yours. You've lost count of the dead, but some are still alive, still breathing, still clutching your hand and whispering thanks. A captain gives you a nod. That's it. No ceremony, no payment, just a nod that says you did your duty. You pack your tools slowly, cleaning what you can with wine and shredded linen. The saw goes in last. As you ride back toward the city, the wind picks up, carrion. Birds circle the field. You don't look back that night. You sit in your shop with your hands in your lap, staring at the floor. You don't move. You don't eat. You just sit, because sometimes there's nothing left to do but exist and wait for the next knock. Asterisk, the candle burns low again, always too fast. When you hear a knock that's neither panicked nor weak, it's firm, measured. You open the door, expecting a merchant or a neighbor with yet another rash, but it's a woman tall, weather-worn, and very, very pregnant. She says one word, now, and that's all it takes. You've been here before, not with her, but with them women on the edge of creation. Pain and fear etched deep into their faces, their bellies round and full of mystery. You grab your cloths, clean water, herbs for cramping, and most importantly your calm voice. You've learned that's half the battle. No one wants a nervous doctor when the baby's halfway to crowning. The house is small, warm, candlelit. A grandmother watches from the corner, lips moving in prayer. A younger sister wrings her hands beside the door, and the woman, the mother, hunched and breathing with the rhythm of storms. Midwifery isn't your specialty, but in this town, specialties are luxuries. If you can stitch a wound and drain a boil, you can catch a baby. You speak softly. You're strong. You're ready. We'll do this together. She doesn't answer, just nods, teeth clenched, sweat already forming along her brow. The birthing stool is old but sturdy. You position her, kneel, feel, time the contractions, offer sips of water between groans, burn sage to settle the air, apply warm compresses, whisper encouragement. And then things shift. The baby's not coming head first. You feel it, feet, a breech, birth. You swallow hard, keep your voice steady, and look her in the eyes. It will be harder, but we can do it. Historians still argue how often medieval breech births ended well. You've seen enough to know the odds aren't in your favor. But the woman grips your arm with fire in her eyes. She's not leaving without this child. You work carefully, hands slick, your every movement deliberate. The grandmother begins to cry softly. You don't blame her. You almost do. 2 dot, and then a foot, then another, a twist. A final cry from the mother, long and rand. The child is in your arms, blue, still too quiet. You don't panic, not aloud. You rub the tiny back, tap the chest, clear the mouth. You breathe a prayer into the air, one you didn't even know you remembered. And then a cry, thin, wavering, but real. You exhale and hand the baby to the sister, who's weeping freely now. The mother leans back, hollowed out and triumphant, tears in her eyes. Is it? You nod. A girl, strong lungs. She laughs once just, a breath, and closes her eyes. You stay to wash the child, wrap her tight, ensure the bleeding has stopped. You mix a light tonic with raspberry leaf and chamomile. You help the mother drink it in slow sips. She thanks you without speaking, just a hand on yours. You remember the first birth you assisted, a boy born too early. You didn't know what to do. He barely fit in your hands. You held him against your chest until his tiny heart gave up. You buried him yourself. You never told anyone. Now you do what you can. You know which herbs ease afterbirth pain, which compresses stop bleeding. You know when to call for a priest and when not to. You know how to break bad news and how to carry it in your chest afterward. You've helped deliver 8 children, 5 lived. That's a good number by your world's standards. And yet, each time you walk home after a birth, your legs feel weak, like you've borrowed your bones for too long. Tonight is no different. You arrive back at your practice with birthing cloths still damp in your satchel. You wash your hands. You light a candle. You sit. You wonder what she named the child. Hope the girl grows up in a world where she doesn't need people like you quite so urgently, but you know she will. You're barely through your morning tonically warm nettle tea when the impossible happens. A page from the castle arrives, cloaked in blue velvet, boots too clean for your street. The Duke requests your presence, he says. Immediately, you blink, unsure whether you're dreaming or cursed, probably both. He doesn't wait for your answer, just turns on his heel and starts walking. You scramble to collect your best satchel, the cleanest cloth you can find, your shiniest, least dented scalpel, and a flask of concentrated valerian. You dab a bit of mint oil on your collar. No sense smelling like boiled socks in front of nobility. You follow the page through cleaner, wider streets, the kind with real gutters and no chamber pots flying from windows, up stone steps and through carved wooden gates into the echoing hush of the castle. Inside, the air is different, heavy with incense and expensive silence. Tapestries muffle every footstep. Servants bow without being looked at. Everyone is trying not to be noticed. They bring you into a room with tall windows, velvet curtains, and a bed the size of your entire practice. The Duke is lying there bare-chested, pale, blinking slowly, as if he's forgotten how his advisors hover nearby, tight-lipped and expectant. The room smells faintly of rosewater and panic. You kneel beside the bed. His skin is warm, too warm. Breath shallow, pulse quick but weak. You recognize the symptoms: overindulgence, exhaustion, and if you're being honest to go. The head steward clears his throat. You will cure him. It's not a request. You nod once. There's no room for error here. Nobles don't get sick. They get unbalanced. They don't die. They suffer accidents. If you fail, you won't just be dismissed. You might be imprisoned. or worse, accused of causing the illness in the first place. Historians still argue whether court physicians were respected experts or expendable pawns. Today, you feel like both. You ask for vinegar and cloths. You prepare a cooling compress of mint, rose petals, and lavender oil. You check his tongue, his nails, his urine in a small, jewel-handled chamber pot. Of course, you declare that his heat humors are dominant, that he needs cooling, rest, gentle bleeding, a mild tonic. You say this with supreme confidence and zero certainty. The steward nods. A servant brings you a golden-laid bowl. You nick the Duke's arm and let a measured stream of blood flow. Not too much, just enough to show you did something. He groans once, then drifts off. The room exhales with him. You're given an hour to monitor. You sit in the corner beside a tapestry of hunting dogs and pretend not to listen to the whispers. They don't ask your name, but they remember your face. That's both blessing and curse. Eventually, the Duke stirs. He blinks at you. You're the doctor, he rasps. Yes, my lord, you're very small. I've found it helps me work faster, you say, without missing a beat. He chuckles, then groans. You take that as a good sign. You leave behind a tincture of poppy syrup and lavender oil. Instruct the steward to avoid strong spices and loud music, he glares, and bow low as you're dismissed. On your way out, a guard silently presses a pouch into your hand. It's heavier than anything you've earned in months. You don't count it until you're back in the alley, sitting on a barrel with your satchel in your lap. Inside, silver coins, real ones, enough to buy new tools, or replace your roof, or maybe just eat something that wasn't baked 4 days ago. You allow yourself a full breath, a moment of pride. You survived a noble case. You even got paid. But then the doubt creeps in. Did you help or just delay? Did he truly recover, or is he already sinking again behind those velvet curtains while you enjoy your bread and brief? Illusion of success. You brush the thoughts away. You did your part. You gave him comfort. You gave them calm. Sometimes that's all medicine really is. Back in your shop, the candlelight feels warmer, the walls less crooked. You hang your coat with care. You polish your smallest blade. You tuck one silver coin into a drawer with a note that says, proof. Tomorrow, the castle may summon you again, or not. But tonight, you eat warm stew and sleep without the mask. For once, you let yourself believe you've earned it. Asterisk, the next morning, you wake to find a curious sight. Your tools neatly arranged. Not by you. You're meticulous, yes, but never that symmetrical. Each item is lined up like a soldier, blades gleaming, twine coiled in perfect spirals. Then you notice the note, a single line, scrawled in hurried script. Check the fever tonics. Someone's been tampering. No name, no signature, just that warning. You glance at your shelves. Everything looks in place, but now you're not so sure. You uncork the fever tonica mix of willow bark, mint, and crushed cherry seed and sniff. It's faint, but something's wrong, bitterer than usual. You test a drop on your tongue. Not deadly, but off. Sabotage. Your first reaction is disbelief. Who would even bother? You're not a noble. You don't have rivals. Not really. But then you remember the barber, the quack tonic sellers, the people who scoff at you behind covered mouths, and the fact that some still whisper you bring the plague, not cure it. You dump the tonic and start over. Boil fresh bark, Crush your herbs by hand. Taste test everything. Then you lock the cabinet. You've never locked it before. Now, it seems foolish not to. It's not the first time you felt watched. A week ago, someone left a chicken's foot on your step. Just the foot, wrapped in twine. You assumed it was a strange payment. Now you wonder. Historians still debate how often medieval physicians were targets of public suspicion. You don't need books to tell you it happens often enough to matter, especially when fear is high and understanding is low. You hear the whispers. He keeps the sick alive too long. He never gets sick himself. How is that possible? He talks to spirits, or rats, or both. You used to laugh at those. Now you watch your back. A few days later, you find your satchel has been moved, just slightly, the clasp closed backwards. The poppy syrup bottle opened, but still full. You smell it. Nothing dangerous yet, but someone's testing boundaries. You don't report it. There's no one to report it to. The warden is busy barricading plague houses. The town priest thinks your remedies are too earthy. And besides, who'd believe you? You, the grim little man in the alley with the candles and beaked mask. So, you start keeping records, not just of patients, but of visits. Who came, when, what they touched, what they took. You hide the ledger beneath your cot. You also stop taking tea from strangers. You inspect every bundle of herbs brought in. You accidentally mix up your bottles before handing them out just once to see if anyone notices. One man does. He goes pale and stammers something about needing to come back later. He doesn't. And then there's the boy, maybe 8, shows up at your door with a fever, shaking, cheeks flushed, says nothing, just holds out a note. Please help him. You treat the boy, gently mint watercloths, poppy for sleep. He recovers within a day. You ask, who is M? He shrugs, leaves, doesn't return. The note remains. You press it flat and keep it in your ledger. Just in case. You begin wondering if someone is testing you. Not trying to kill you, but observing, measuring, seeing how you react under pressure. You've seen that look in patients' eyes before, certain glint, like they're not there to be healed, but to watch. So you adapt. You work quietly, speak less, trust fewer people, but you keep healing. Because, amid all the suspicion and half-glances, the real patients still come. The boy with the split lip, the woman with the sore throat, the man whose fingers are turning black and who doesn't even flinch as you lance them. Open. They trust you. Enough to knock. Enough to let you near their children. So, you tighten your satchel buckles. You sharpen your blades at dawn. You boil your tools twice instead of once. You wear your mask even when it's not needed. Not out of fear, out of readiness. Because someone might wish you gone, but someone else always needs you more. And you'll be ready. She limps in just before dusk, one hand on her side, the other gripping a walking stick that looks older than the town itself. She's quiet, dirty, eyes wary. You've seen her before. Once, at the edge of market day. She sells wool, or maybe cheese, something simple. The kind of woman who endures. Not the kind who comes here unless she has to. You motion to the stool. She lowers herself onto it, like it's the last thing she'll ever do, wincing as she moves. You see the pain before she says a word. My back, she mutters, feels like it's full of knives. Been weeks. You nod. Chronic illness. Not the plague, not a wound, not something you can cut, sew, or bleed. The quiet pain that creeps in like a damp breeze and makes a home in the bones. These are the hardest cases. Not because they're dangerous, but because they don't go away. You press gently along her spine. She flinches at the base. You hum quietly, more for yourself than for her, and say, you carry too much, you sleep cold, and you sit wrong. She snorts. That's life, isn't it? You smile. She's not wrong. You prepare a compress with comfrey and ginger root. Warm it by the brazier. Wrap it in linen and press it to the base of her spine. She sighs, not relief exactly, but recognition. You give her stretching instructions. Show her where to press on her own back. Tell her which herbs to drink in tea. Meadowsweet, willow, a touch of mint for the taste. She won't follow half of it. You know that. But she nods, and that's enough. Chronic pain isn't glamorous. It doesn't come with fever or blood. It doesn't scream, it whispers, gnaws, steals sleep, then patience, then joy, and there's no cure, only care. You've treated dozens like her. The weaver with trembling hands. The merchant's wife whose stomach knots every month like clockwork. The stonecutter whose knees ache every time it rains. You've tried everything. Warm baths, poultices, bleeding, purgatives, dry cupping, even guided meditation with a particularly strange monk once. Some things help, some don't. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians understood chronic illness. Some say you didn't even try. Others point to your ledgers, your herbal notes, your careful records. You think the truth is simpler. You listened, and that mattered. You had a patient, once young, pale, always tired, no fever, no sores, just exhaustion. You called it melancholic imbalance, gave him honeyed wine with rosemary, and told him to walk in the sun. He cried when you said it wasn't all in his head. He still writes you letters. One arrived last week. I wake with less pain now, thank you. You keep that one in your ledger, too. But not every case ends in gratitude. There was the man who came in, angry, demanded a cure for his aching joints. When you told him there was no easy fix, he accused you of being useless. He shouted all the way down the street. For a week, business slowed. You started boiling your front step just in case. But you stayed, because you've learned something rare. Helping someone live with pain is just as noble as trying to erase it. You finish wrapping the woman's back and offer her a small vial of oil lavender with a touch of feverfew. Rub this in before bed. Tell the stiffness you see it. Don't try to chase it off. Just acknowledge it. She eyes you with something like amusement. You always talk like that. You shrugged. Only when it works. She leaves quietly, doesn't say thank you, but her step is steadier than when she arrived. You return to your bench and clean the bowls, wiping down the wood with vinegar. The fire crackles low. Outside, someone coughs into the fog. You wonder how many people in this town live with pain they've never spoken aloud. You hope they come to you. Even if you can't fix them, you can see them. And sometimes, being seen is the beginning of healing. Asterisk, it's cleaning day. Or rather, you've decided it's cleaning day mostly, because everything in your practice has begun to develop a faint but unmistakable odor of boiled socks and damp wool. You roll up your sleeves, light a brazier of juniper and thyme, and set to work. First, the tools, each blade, hook, clamp, and spoon gets a rinse in Win the cheap kind, sharp enough to make your nose wrinkle in a scrub with linen. You sharpen what needs sharpening, rewrap what needs wrapping. You murmur apologies to your fingers as the vinegar stings old cuts. You don't have gloves? Of course not. You've heard of leather hand coverings worn by some scholars in distant cities. But in your world, cleanish rags and a strong stomach are the best you can manage. Then the surfaces, your work table, your shelves, even the underside of the stoolware Gerard used to hide back when he still made appearances. You sweep out dried leaves, tufts of hair, an unfortunate beetle, and what appears to be half a chicken feather. You hope it's a feather. And finally, the linens. You boil water in your iron pot, toss in old rags and cloths, and stir like you're making a terrible stew. The steam fills the room. You cough. Then you add lavender. Historians still debate whether medieval doctors truly understood the importance of sanitation or if they were just trying to fight the smell. You suspect it's the latter. But even if you don't know about germs, you know that tools left to soak in last week's pus tend to grow things. You learned the hard way. Early on, you reused a lancet too quickly. A boy developed a swelling. It turned dark. He lost a finger. You didn't sleep for 3 nights. After that, you started rinsing everything in vinegar. It's not perfect, but it's something. You also keep a jar of ash and salt under your table. You scrub your hands with it when there's no wine to spare. It tears at the skin, but it feels clean afterward. People assume your tools are blessed because they shine. They aren't. They're just well scoured. You let them think otherwise. Let them imagine prayers and incantations. It's better than explaining the virtues of salt and a sharp whetstone. You once tried to explain your routine to the barber. He laughed, waved a scalpel that still had something unidentifiable on it, and said, "If they're gonna die, they'll die clean." You didn't laugh. You just started boiling your tools twice after every visit from his patients. Today, you go further. You reorganize your shelves. You find 3 jars of herbs that have long since turned to powder. You sweep mouse droppings from behind your storage chest. You even wipe down the inside of your shutter with vinegar and thyme just in case that's where the smell was hiding. You discover one of your own notes tucked behind the herb rack. It reads, "Don't touch the green salve after sunset." You have no memory of writing it. You throw the salve away. You replace the candle stubs. Scrub the floorboards with soapy water borrowed from the tanner's wife. Air out your bedding. You hang fresh herbs, marjoram, lemon balm, hyssop from the rafters. For the first time in weeks, your practice smells like a garden instead of a sickbed. You light a new candle and sit for a moment, just breathing, just being. There's a strange peace in cleaning. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't stop fevers or cure infections, but it gives you the illusion of control. And sometimes that's all you need. You glance around, the tools gleam. The air is sharp with mint and wine. The stool, still wobbly, still legendaries, sits proudly in its place. You know it won't last. Tomorrow, someone will arrive coughing blood. A child will vomit on your floor. You'll forget which cloth was clean, and the smell will return. But for now, the place is clean, truly clean. You wash your hands once more for good measure. You smile, and you go to sleep with your window open, letting the fresh night air in. Just once, you dream of your practice, as it could be stone floors, smooth benches, a basin of hot water that never cools, a place where no one bleeds on the good linens, and even in the dream, you're still cleaning. It's just after midday when the knock comes, a soft, polite sort of knock, not panicked, not desperate, just curious. You open the door to find a young man, traveling cloak, still dusty, standing beside a donkey, carrying 2 bulging saddle bags. He's clean-shaven, smells faintly of ink and citrus, and holds a bound book like it's made of gold. "I heard about your practice," he says. "May I speak with you?" You eye him warily. "To clean, to calm, to well-fed." You nod once and motion him inside. He doesn't sit. He observes the herbs, the tools, the floor, the stool. He squints at your jar of leeches like it might bite him. Then he smiles. Fascinating. He introduces himself as a scholar from a southern city where they've begun experimenting with something he calls clinical observation. He's heard rumors of a peculiar doctor up north who treats the poor, tracks symptoms, and doesn't always rely on bloodletting. You can't tell if that's an insult or a compliment. He begins asking questions. How do you decide which herbs to use? How do you know when to bleed and when not to? Why do you burn rosemary in the afternoons? Do you believe in spirits or balance? Do you wash your hands between patients? You answer simply, honestly. Sometimes you know. Sometimes you guess. Sometimes the guess works. Sometimes it doesn't. Single quotes. He pulls out a notebook and begins writing rapidly. "You've documented everything, haven't you?" he says. "Symptoms, treatments, outcomes." You nod. "Your ledger isn't beautiful, but it's thorough. You've marked fever patterns, the color of phlegm, the days between symptoms. You've even charted how certain herbs behave under different moons, not because it's proven, but because you noticed patterns." Historians still argue whether medieval doctors were observers or followers, whether they relied on rote theory or actual evidence. You think the truth, as always, is a mess of both. You show him your notes. He scans them with reverence, like Holy Scripture. You test things. He whispers. You notice things. You're not sure how to reply. It hadn't felt like science. It had felt like survival. He shows you his own notes drawings of anatomy, descriptions of dissections done in universities. The detail is stunning. You recognize some organs, others you've never seen. Some of it matches your experience. Some doesn't. You don't hide your awe. He doesn't hide his curiosity. You spend the rest of the afternoon exchanging knowledge. He describes a new theory of invisible seeds of disease, things too small to see, but passed from person to person. You raise an eyebrow, but you don't laugh. After all, you've always suspected that plague travels faster than wind, faster than breath. Maybe it is something smaller than breath. He's fascinated by your practical methods, using smell to guess infection, listening to breath sounds, changing poultices based on skin color. You treat the body as a whole, he says, not just by theory. You shrugged. People don't live in theory. He laughs, writes that down. When the sun begins to set, he stands. You should come south, he says. There are others who think like you, who test. You say nothing. You know you won't leave. This town is your patient, now foul breath and all. He leaves a small stack of papers behind notes, diagrams, even a recipe for something called spirit of ammonia. He tells you to burn them if anyone asks. You don't ask why. You walk him out as far as the square. He mounts his donkey and waves once. Then he's gone. You return to your practice, papers in hand. You tuck them in your ledger. You boil your tools. You prepare your herbs. You light your candle. And for the first time in a long time, you feel connected. Like what you do might matter beyond your crooked doorway. You still don't have answers, but you have better questions. And maybe that's enough. Asterisk, the first frost arrives overnight. You wake 2 windows dusted with silver, and your breath fogging the air. The streets are quieter now. Illness moves differently in cold air, slower, maybe, but meaner. You open your shutters and see the signs you've been dreading. Children wrapped, too thin, smoke curling from fewer chimneys, a man coughing into a cloth he thinks no one can see. Winter is here, and with it comes the long season of waiting, watching, whispering. You put on your thickest cloak, one sleeve repaired with butcher's twine. You check your jars nearly out of dried thyme, down to the dregs of your ginger. You'll need to trade. Maybe the old apiarist will take a look at your infected foot if you offer him a salve for bee stings as you prepare a new batch of cough syrup. Garlic, licorice, root. You hear a knock. It's a young man, tall but hunched face, pale and eyes glassy. "It's my brother," he says. "Won't wake up. He was breathing shallow last night. Now nothing." You don't ask more. You grab your bag. The house is dark and damp. A single candle flickers in the corner. The boy barely under threadbare blankets. You feel for a pulse. There's one faint fluttering. You press a warm cloth to his chest. You check his feet, cold and blotched. His lips are tinged blue. You pull out your warming salts. You boil a small pot of wine and herbs. You speak softly, not to the boy, but to the room. It listens. His breathing steadies. His hands twitch. He groans. You feel the room exhale. The older brother drops to his knees. "Bless you," he whispers. You nod. You don't say what you're thinking. This is the first of many. Winter is cruel. You'll see more of these children, pale as ash, elders who fall asleep and never wake, joints stiffened by frost. You'll deliver babies in freezing rooms, mix fever tea with frozen fingers. You'll boil your tools beside the fire and hope the wine doesn't turn to ice before it's drunk. Historians still debate whether medieval winters were as harsh as the records suggest. But here, with your hands cracked and your breath visible, indoors, you know the answer. You return home with an offering, half a wheel of cheese, soft and warm from being carried under a coat. You eat it in silence, staring at the frost creeping across your shutters. You light your evening candle early. You check your leeches sluggish, but alive. You wrap your hands in cloth before bed, and you wonder who will knock tomorrow, because someone always does. And so you wait, not with dread, but with readiness, because despite the cold, the dark, the long hours, the failures, and the aches, this is the life you chose, or perhaps the life that chose you. You don't wear a crown. You don't sit in marble halls. You don't sign your name in gold ink, but you ease pain. You hold hands. You whisper comfort. You give sleep to the sleepless and breath to the breathless. You are a medieval doctor, and though it often sucks, it also sometimes matters. So now, as your breath softens and the weight of the blanket hugs you close, let's leave this world of cold flagstones, bitter tonics, and flickering candlelight behind. Let the tools rest on the bench. Let the shutters close, and the last herbal steam drift quietly into the rafters. Imagine the doctor hours strange, stubborn healer settling down for the night, hands cracked, knees aching, but heart still intact. The town sleeps, trusting that, if illness stirs, someone will answer. Someone who's seen it all. Outside, the wind hums low across the thatched roofs. The moon paints silver shadows across cobblestone lanes. And somewhere, perhaps, a rat named Gerard dreams peacefully beneath a floorboard, curled up beside a forgotten sachet of sage dot. You are warm now, safe. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the quiet steps of that tired doctor who walks through sickness, not for glory, but because someone has to. Feel the slow weight of sleep settle across your shoulders like a woolen cloak on a cold day. You've walked through the grime and grit of another time, but here, now, in your bed, none of it can touch you. Not the fevers, not the frost, not even the leeches. You've done enough for today. If you're still here, that means this story found its way to you. Don't forget to subscribe, tap the like, and let me know where you're listening from. Thank you for joining me on this little time travel. Sleep well.